Right, welcome everybody to the Scrutiny Committee of the 5th of February 2020. There's no fire alarms planned, so leave if the fire alarm does sound. I'd like to welcome you all here today and remind you not to have your mobile phones, or if they are on, to be on silent. Councillor Reid. Okay, thanks. Are there any apologies for today's meeting?
Yes, Convener. Apologies from Councillors Purvis, Dugan and Stewart, and got substitutions from Councillor Sarwar and Williamson.
Thanks. Are there any declarations of interest in today's business? Any items? Okay, thank you. Can we agree the Scrutiny Committee minute from the 27th of November? Good. This may be one of the shortest Scrutiny Committee meetings, instead of a 3.5-hour marathon that we normally have. And we'll open up today with Scott Walker giving us some up-to-date financials on Horsecross. And then, for those of you who have not met Nick Williams, the new Interim Chief Executive of Horsecross, he will then give us an update of where he is and how he's going to move the organisation forward. For the pleasure of having a briefing session from Nick, and I'm sure you'll be impressed with his vision for this very important part of Perth Kinross's leisure and entertainment offer. So without any further ado, I'll pass over to Scott Walker.
Okay, thank you, Convener. Good afternoon, councillors. As the Convener said, I'd like to just provide a quick update on the latest Horsecross financial position before I hand over to Nick Williams, the new Chief Executive of Horsecross. Before I begin, again, I'd like to thank my colleagues Mark Grant and Karen Johnson for their support during our support for Horsecross, as well as the finance staff along at Horsecross, and also Nick for his support to date. So last June, the Scrutiny Committee were advised that the former Horsecross Board had approved a balanced break-even budget. At your meeting in September, I provided an update with the latest projected outturns based on the Q1 data, and what that set out at that time was a projected surplus of £74,000. In November, I provided a further update based on the Q2 projections, and at that time we were projecting a surplus of £50,000. So what I'd like to do today is bring you up to date with our latest projections, and these are based on Q3, which ended on the 31st of December. And right now, we're projecting a surplus of £21,000. I'll come on to the detail behind that in the next slide, but I'm going to just pause there quickly if there are any questions on that slide. Okay. So, in terms of where we are just now, as usual, we've split it between the charitable side of the business and the trading side of the business, or the courses and conferences. So firstly, in terms of the charitable side of the business, we've updated the income assumptions. They've been further firmed up, and we're now projecting £3.883 million of income in the current year. Now that's a reduction of £133,000 from the last update, and that's followed a robust review of income, particularly around classical ticket sales and rental income. Total expenditure on the charitable side is projected to be £2.807 million, and again, that's a reduction of £116,000. And that's come about due to careful management of costs, particularly in relation to the pantomime around cast and crew, as well as utility costs. Overheads are projected to be £1.547 million, and that's an increase of £34,000. Now, the main reason for that movement is that we've discovered that staff along at Horsecross have been working significant extra hours and accumulated high levels of toil over the last wee while. So Nick is working to reduce that, but we have made provision to make some sorts of payments in this financial year. So the net result of those adjustments to date are that we're now projecting an operating deficit on the charitable side of the business of £193,000. So following a busy Q3, I'm also pleased to advise that catering and conferencing is now projected to achieve an additional surplus of £22,000 due to increased activity, particularly over the festive period. So what that should mean is that a trading profit of £214,000 in 1920 should be returned to the bottom line. And what that means is that we're now projecting an in-year surplus of £21,000. Any questions on that? Councillor Olmert?
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Does that group surplus of £21,000 include the injection from PKC in July of the last year?
Yes, it does. It includes the full £180,000 that was budgeted in February last year.
Scott, the total income down by 133, is that because we're having more realistic targets?
Well, Mark and Karen are meeting with the managers much more regular basis. The assumptions are now much more robust. We're also at Q3, so we have much more firm information to base them on. So, you know, the closer it gets to the end of the financial year, the more right we should get with the projections, or the more closer we should get with the projections. Okay. So this slide is hopefully familiar to you. Sorry, the format of this slide should be familiar. It sets out the cash flow position through for the next 12 months. At the last meeting of this committee, the cash flow I presented included a couple of months that might have proved problematic. We are more strictly managing and monitoring the cash flow position, and I'm pleased to advise the committee today that the latest cash flow is looking positive for the next 12 months. Obviously, this position is kept under regular review. Any questions on that one?
Thank you, Scott. Is it traditional that your cash flow problems, so like most of your outgoings tend to be ahead of production, and, or costs of putting on performances or whatever? So
I would say it's probably a mix, depending on the type of production, but I don't know if Nick wants to add anything to that.
So cash flow is really very complicated within this organisation because it is a mixture of different deals with different presenters. So what tends to happen within the theatre is that we spend a lot of money before performances, and in your ideal world your pre-sales would balance that out, but it doesn't always quite work that way. Within the concert halls you tend to have large sums of cash in, and then those large sums go out, taking off our costs, fees, and take within 28 days of the performances. And at busy periods, we have very large sums coming in and out on weekly basis. So I think what has previously not been done is looking across the programme and working the cash flow to match the programming need, and then managing that accordingly. Does that?
I was just wondering, therefore within those figures there, what percentage are actually pre-sales, and what percentage do you have a rough estimate of what that looks like?
We don't have that information with us today, but we could certainly come back to you with that if that would be useful.
Okay, Tom.
I may be naive, but why does the cash flow fall so far in September and January from the norm, which seems to be, you know, there seem to be huge falls?
I think the summer months is quite a quiet period for Horse Cross, is that fair to say? Yeah. And the January, sorry, which column are you? January 21? Yeah. So it's at the end of December 20. I don't have the detail, do we? I can come back to you on that one. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
So in January, what tends to happen is that we finish the panto at the very beginning of the month, and then we go into 2 weeks of maintenance, and we settle the Christmas season, which has been a busy period, but we don't have very much programming, so we're not getting the ticket sales side of things, and it being January, catering tends to be quieter.
Can I have a quick supplementary? My understanding always used to be, when I was a little boy, that pantomimes went on well into January. So why doesn't the one in Perth go on into January?
I think it's probably fair to say that we start Panto at the end of November and we run through to January, the beginning of January, because that's pretty much the capacity that will come to Panto at the present time. I think it's a trend across the UK to stop those Pantos much earlier than they used to, and I absolutely agree. You know, when I was growing up, Panto would go on to the beginning of February in my hometown, Swansea, but it's just, I think, not feasible to do that now because I think the focus is pre-Christmas, and we do, when it's been tried before, the drop after the New Year is significant.
Thanks, Nick. Councillor Jarvis.
Okay. Well, my question's actually on those same 2 months, and I was wondering how they compared to last year, part of the overall picture.
So again, we've not got that detail with us, but happy to provide that after the meeting.
I think, from memory, I think that a lot of the figures are cyclical, whatever we pronounce it. Yeah. And that, you know, you'll have your troughs, as Nick's pointed out, as to when maintenance has been done and when it's a quieter time, because you've still got staff to pay. So I think that when Scott does provide you with the figures, you'll find that year on year, that's when the dip in the cash flow is.
Well, I would expect that, in fact, but I just wondered, I was looking for a comparison because, you know, I'm new to this committee and it was just to see what the overall picture was.
We'll make sure Scott gets you the information on, okay? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. I know Councillor Williamson asked about the percentage of advance ticket sales, but I think we've discussed this before at committee about the value of advance ticket sales and what we might be liable for in terms of our cash flow if their shows were cancelled or something happened that they couldn't go ahead through weather incidents or whatever, and what our liabilities might be for those.
I'll maybe start that, if that's okay. So we have got a level of detail below this cash flow. It's obviously we're not showing it at that level of detail. And we have it analysed by the different types of show, etc. I think each show has its own particular rules and contract specifications, etc. But that is factored into our planning assumptions in the cash flow.
Could I ask, do you therefore insure I'm trying to say this without spitting my teeth out, but insure a show before it's, in case it gets cancelled?
We carry a fairly standard insurance policy for venues like this, and it slightly depends on what the nature of the show is. So if it's one of our own performances, mainly at the theatre, we have insurance against cancellation. Say something terrible happens and an actor breaks their neck and we have to cancel shows, we can claim against that. When they're shows toured in or brought by a promoter, the liability for that sits with the promoter in the main, but it does depend on the nature of the deal. So what tends to happen is that if there's a split risk, meaning that we would take a percentage of box office rather than just the fee or charge them a fee, then our insurance will cover our liability to that percentage point. If it's the promoter's risk, then they are liable, but of course we are receiving those funds on their behalf. You know, we sit on a lot of cash on a daily basis, but it's not our money a lot of the time. You know, it's quite, there are some provisions in our insurance around that level of cash that we hold, but it's cash at the bank and electronic rather than real cash. But you know, it's one of those things for review in the annual insurance review process, if I'm honest, and that's coming up in on the new financial year.
Okay, thanks for that. Are there any other questions on this slide? Continue, Scott.
Okay, so finally for me, just an update in relation to some of our other work that we're doing to support Horsecross. We've implemented and continue to run formal and robust meetings, budget monitoring meetings with all managers, and the output from those meetings is agreed with Nick as the Chief Executive. We are developing reports to provide better management information from managers across the organisation to help them do their jobs better. We're still making system improvements, including corporate banking, payroll and commitment accounting. The new Chief Executive is undertaking a review of the finance structure, and we are supporting him through this process. And finally, we're using the output from the recent external inspection as our work plan to roll out a host of improvements to financial management and governance across the whole of Horsecross. And that's me finished. Sorry.
How long do you see the involvement of council officers assisting and collaborating with the staff of Horsecross moving forward?
I think that very much depends on how Nick gets on with his interim finance structure. We're there to help. I think you're having conversations right now. We're not going to be walking away. We're here to support, but hopefully there'll be an orderly transition to the new finance support.
Thanks for that, Scott. And before I got questions, I'd like to thank you and your team that's gone in and got us to this position now where we seem to be able to have more robust figures and have more confidence in what we're seeing. And I'm sure that when it goes over that you'll always be on call to Nick or his team when required. So I think a lot of thanks should go to the council officers who've helped Horsecross pull through this time, and moving forward we'll continue to assist them. Okay. David.
Just a quick question, Scott. You talk about budget monitoring meetings. How often are they held?
So, in our regime, they're being held monthly. Much more detail towards the end of the quarterly, but Mark and Karen are meeting with the budget managers basically on a monthly basis to keep them up to date.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Scott, or can we let him go? I'll let you go, Scott.
Thank you.
So now we'll welcome Nick to come and give a presentation of, hopefully, instead of going over old ground, but moving forward, how his vision for Horsecross and what he sees as his role and the role of the other people, the new board that will be formed, etc., moving forward.
Good afternoon. Good to meet you all. I want to just start with a brief snapshot because I think clearly this committee has heard an awful lot about the problems of the organisation, but there are some good things to point out, and it's important to share those at the same time. We had a very successful Christmas, which I think led to, we had the weekend immediately before Christmas, every single thing that we did was sold out. So that was across the theatre, the studio at the theatre, and the concert hall. And bearing in mind that's about 2,000 seats per gig, it's a pretty good starting point. Over the entirety of the Christmas season, we had 30,000 people through the doors, and that was across everything that we do, whether it was panto or classical music, tribute acts or popular music. So we are capable of drawing in the punters. We are capable of making this work when we get it right. Just to give you a snapshot of where the numbers are at in terms of attendances on this slide, we're a bit ahead, but I think there are some issues around ticket yield and ticket pricing in there, which is why the income is down. I want to just outline quickly the challenges that we're facing here. Through Scott and his team's work, we're looking at what is essentially a structural deficit of around £300,000. So that's the way in which the organisation is currently structured and set up and operates, and the deficit between what we think we might earn against what it actually costs. In addition to that, there was the huge increase in minimum wage that was announced over Christmas, which causes us a very large problem for our catering teams, our front of house teams, and some of our box office teams. When you factor in on costs, so employers' national insurance and pension contributions as well, it's not actually just 50 pence per hour that is going up by, it's more like £1. And then there are union increases for the work that we produce at the theatre. So they are set by Equity and the management unions on an annual basis. And so when we employ an actor, we tend to also have to pay for them to stay here in town and pay for their travel. So it's not just a salary, it's a cost of bringing them here and the cost of them staying here. And they all go up every single year with very little choice. We had offered very little choice as to what we do about them. If we don't pay them, we get blacklisted, which means that lots of actors won't come and work with us. So a brief outline really of what my plans are and how I've been charged by the board to meet those challenges. To start with, I'm taking a large look at the structure of the organisation. I think it's fair to say that there are ways in which the organisation is currently structured that have been done for certain reasons but don't make much sense anymore. So in revising the structure, what I'm attempting to do is make a much clearer management chain to offer greater ownership over budgets, budget management and control, and to essentially empower those members of staff to own those budgets and manage them accordingly through the year. This is quite a big cultural shift within the organisation, if it's fair to say. There are a number of things that we do at present which are costly, and so we're looking to reduce and change those ways of working. For example, you're very aware, I'm sure, that the concert hall can change its configuration. It can be a flat floor, it can be fully standing, it can be seated in cabaret format, it can have fully seated. Every time we change that overnight, it costs double what it would cost if we did it in the daytime. Sometimes we can charge that the cost of rearranging to people who are hiring us or to different promoters, but not always. So we need to look at our own scheduling to make sure that we don't do things to ourselves that we can't afford. I'm looking at how we look at our catering contracts at the moment. A lot of that staff are currently on 0 hours or very small minimum hours contracts. And I think it's fair to say that if we offer annualized hours, it helps both them get a fixed income and us to know exactly what our cost base is and exactly and have the power to flex that staffing as and when we need it. We're looking at things like changes to box office opening times. You'll be aware that we currently run 2 full-time box offices at both venues, and there might be ways of only running one of them on quieter times. Obviously, we need a box office open for when people want to come and book tickets, and they do that all day, every day. We need a box office open before performances. But there are ways and means of focusing in that structure so that we can make sure that we are both serving our audience but keeping a tight lid on our costs. Changes in that sort of contracting, we, as following a model that we looked at the technical department as well. They rely currently on a very heavy casual pool of labour, and actually if we create just 2 full-time posts, we're able to cover the needs of that department and give ourselves greater capacity without relying on people who are on 0 hours contracts. So I think there are some positives to come out of it. We're taking a look at the programming cycle. At present, we run 3 brochures a year, and my intention is to move to 2 brochures a year. It's fairly common across a lot of performing arts organisations to only run a 2 brochure year. And that cycle will essentially give the marketing department more breathing space to sell individual shows rather than being in an almost constant cycle of brochure production. You have a copy of the current brochure in front of you. You can see the volume of events that go through both buildings in a season. So the shift is not an insubstantial shift for us in terms of getting there. The next brochure will run from July until December and will be published in May. And for the gap between the current brochure and the new brochure, we're doing a range of more targeted individual pieces of print. So there'll be a small comedy brochure because we have a bunch of comedians coming in May and June that won't be in one of those brochures, for example. As we look at that cycle, we will start to look at what we are doing as well. I think it's fair to say that all organisations need to keep interrogating what they do and who it's for. And my intention is to put a very clear focus on audience for future programming. And so that means a much more robust set of conversations around who the audience for each performance that we're scheduling is likely to be, so we can be much more robust about how we target them, what the ticket income is actually likely to be. The final element of program that we're looking at the moment is creative learning. The current program pretty much stems all the way back to the opening of the concert hall in 2005, and is very much due for a refresh anyway. There are some elements that are underperforming, and we need to take a look at those and work out what we're doing wrong, how can we reach more people. I think it's fair to say that we want to get out and about in Perth and Kinross much more, rather than drawing people to us all the time. I think it's clear that partnership working is absolutely the way forward with a lot of creative learning work. But it's a little bit like a juggernaut at the moment, and we need to just slow it down. That will kick in from the end of the term after Easter. So there's a natural break in the cycle, during which time we will review what we do and represent it for the autumn. I think it's fair to say that as that shifts, there will probably be a drop in some participant numbers for a short period, because we will reconfigure who we're working with. I think it's also fair to say that we need to be much stronger in responding to demand rather than doing what we want and what we think is best. Other work to improve the income side of what we're doing is pushing ahead on conference business. We currently have, just in terms of room hire, £123,000 worth of hires contracted. It's ahead of the same position, the position last year. So this time last year it was 88,000, so we're almost 40,000 in advance. That doesn't factor in the catering spend that comes with some of those conferences. And we have a number of multi-day conferences booked in. So we've got 5 multi-day conferences booked in through the year, including a lot of political parties and trade union conferencing. So there's an additional knock-on spend for the city at large in terms of overnight stays. We're looking at the facilities we have and how we might monetize them better. We have a fantastic reputation for the quality of our set building. And some of the time, there is spare capacity there as we are not producing all year round. So we've started a conversation with the National Theatre Scotland, and it looks likely that we will build between either 2 or 3 of their sets for their Edinburgh International Festival season, which will generate between £10,000 and £15,000 of profit for us. It's a new income stream. It will take time to build, and it does have to fit in with what it is that we're doing as well. But I think it's a productive and supportive intervention into the theatre sector at large, and something we can offer to conference companies as well as a further part of the package. We're looking at some of our assets. You may be aware that we have a store in Van Almond. It's got an enormous number of things in it, including a vast number of costumes. I think before the theatre was closed for redevelopment, there was a big sell-off up at that store that realised about £15,000. It is timely to do it again because we are running out of space. So we're going to do a costume sale that will have both public and industry-facing sides to it. It is the theatre's 120th anniversary in September, and so we will do a public open day and sale at the store as a part of that. But there are things like our Militaria collection that is probably not really worth us holding on to that can be sold to specialist buyers. You may also be aware that we hold a digital art collection that is played on the screens in the concert hall. There's a very real risk of obsolescence there because it's been running for 15 years, and if you think back 15 years and IT provision, you'll realise that the world has changed dramatically. So I think it best that we no longer hold this collection and that actually it's with a specialist contemporary arts organisation that can absolutely manage that rather than us hold on to it. We're looking at fundraising. Fundraising has been an upward trend over the last few years, which is positive. We have a small fundraising team, but they are enthusiastic and very much a bunch of go-getters. There are some challenges around things like the single member status, which certain trusts and foundations do not like. But I also think that there's a lot of opportunities, certainly around individual giving and the potential for more sponsorship income. And then finally, we're looking at how our catering offer is positioned as a part of a city-wide catering offer. I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of competition in town. I think there's a lot of great places to eat and drink throughout the city centre, and we have to keep up with that competition. And so we're looking at how we might revise those offers to, one, attract people in on an all-day basis, as well as servicing people that are coming to our performances, as well as servicing our catering income. Our conferencing income side of the business as well. It's quite a complicated setup, but actually one that I think the team, when challenged to think about what we might do differently and how we could improve, are really up for that challenge and really sort of generating a lot of ideas. We're going to do a little bit of public consultation around it as well, because we have lots of people who are regulars in our cafes, so we should always talk to our customers. We should talk to people who come to gigs about what they need, and we should talk to people who don't come to see what might bring them in. To give you a sense of timescale, some of this is not quick, I'm afraid. So changes to programming might take up to 12 months, and that's because certain elements of the program are booked in very far in advance. To give you an example, the week before I arrived here, the Hairy Bikers' latest live show was put on sale. It isn't happening until late October, but that's because the promoter wanted to put a whole year's worth of dates on sale at the same time. This happens to us fairly regularly, so there are elements in the program that are sort of beyond our control in terms of whether we would want to shift them around. So it will take some time before you notice a change in what's in that brochure. The programming and marketing cycle, the move to the 2-brochure year, will kick in from July. We'll publish that brochure in May this year to give us a little bit more lead time than perhaps that's previously been the case. In terms of structural change around staff, we are going to go into consultation in the late winter, early spring. So as I pull together the final costings and budgets of that over the coming weeks, we'll be ready to start talking to staff about what that means for them. The revised staffing structure should be fully populated by the summer. And the revision to cafe operations should also kick in from the spring. So just in summary, we are engaged in a program of major organisational change this year. It is going to reach across the entire organisation. We're still working on what the costs of change might be, but ultimately seeking to meet that £300,000 deficit. There will be, as I said, some reductions in programming, most notably in the short term in creative learning, for immediate savings, but that will develop further as that new program rolls out. And changes to the programming model will follow as we move into a freer cycle that I'm able to influence a lot more. That's all I have to say, and would welcome your questions.
Thanks very much, Nick. Well, I'll say it now. I was going to say then, but I'm sure everybody in here wishes you every success with this moving forward, and all the people at Perth Kinross will wish you every success, because it is such an important asset that we have. So that said, I'll open up to any questions, and we'll start with Chris, Councillor Ahern.
Thanks very much, and I echo your sentiments just then. It's safe to say that the last few months has been really turbulent within the Horse-Cross Arts. I'm just wondering, the staff have been through a lot, and I'm just wondering what the morale of the staff is like now, and their sort of willingness to accept the changes that are coming.
I think it's fair to say that when I arrived at the beginning of December, morale was really very low. I think there was a strong sense of uncertainty. I think that uncertainty is still there because the detail of the changes hasn't been shared widely yet, because it's still being worked out. One of the things that I do think has happened, though, is that there is an absolute awareness of things needing to change. I think from all sorts of directions, there have been interesting ideas, thoughts and inputs on how we might do that as well. And I invited that when I arrived. And from places that you might not expect, you know, where sort of technicians saying, well, I've always wondered why we don't do this in the programme or that in the programme. Or catering staff making really good insights into operational matters that just no one had asked them about before, but they are the eyes and ears of the organisation because they deal with the customers every single day. So there's still some anxiety, but I do think that everyone desperately wants the organisation to work, and they recognise their own potential role in making it work. And I'm very clear that I want everyone to sort of input into the process that we're going through, so that whilst there might be very good reasons to not do something that is suggested, I want everyone to feel that they've had their voice heard. And I think that's the best way to go into a major change programme, to help people at least feel listened to, even if I can't do what they would like me to do.
Thanks very much. I feel your comments there are good in moving forward and accepting that the working as a team and everybody in the team has an input.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Chris. Councillor Harry Coates.
I would like to echo my colleagues' appreciation of what Horse-Cross does, and I think it's an absolute jewel in the Perth and Kinross crown. You know, we need it. We desperately need it. But do you think, and this is the second part of what I'm going to say, do you think that Horse-Cross Arts has a strong enough online presence to drive things forward?
I think that the current online presence is problematic. I think there are a range of issues there, partly to do with the website, how it's structured and how it works. And I've been talking with my marketing department about what quick fixes we can do to that, because I understand that it's a relatively new website. However, if it has to be entirely replaced, then that's what we will do. I think that our other online presences at the moment are a little difficult to navigate. We have too many accounts operated by too many different people across too many different platforms that are not all singing from the same hymn sheet. But that's a process that we can work through, hopefully fairly quickly. I think in terms of how online marketing has been used to date, it hasn't been as effective as it could be, but we've made some changes very recently in terms of how we paid for advertising in Facebook, for example, that is already showing quite a lot of benefit and return. So I think there's stuff there that we can turn around quickly whilst we work out a longer term plan. But I absolutely take your point that some of that is not as good or effective as it should be.
Thanks for that. It's a good question, Councillor Coates. Any further questions? Councillor Williamson.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier about going out, and I was just wondering, have you unintended consequences of that going out been factored into what you intend to do? You're competing against likes of Pitlochry, Stirling, and Dundee, and possibly St Andrews theatres. They're all basically competing for the same market, I suppose. So by touring, I would imagine you're going to be standing on somebody's toes. And have those consequences been thought through and possibly ended up back at the council's door through further subsidies or whatever,
Yes, so in terms of going out into the community, I was actually referring to the Creative Learning Department mainly. In terms of touring, we are not a touring organisation. We are a theatre in a city centre. However, we do already do an annual rural tour, and the Signal One is this year's tour, which travels around mainly Perth and Kinross, but a little bit in Fife as well. And in terms of the other theatres, there is a movement for a collaborative consortium around sharing work that involves Dundee and Pitlochry, ourselves, Stirling, both the Lyceum and the Traverse, the Citizens and the Tron, to enable Scottish-made work to travel and reach audiences more broadly. As a part of that, I'm in discussion with both Pitlochry and Dundee and Stirling, actually, about how audience crossover works between us. Creative Scotland are funding an organisation called the Audience Agency, who are essentially crunch the data on audiences and give us a picture. And one of the subgroups that I have asked for is between that group of theatres, so that we can understand if or how we're in competition. My instinct on it at the moment is that the competition might be there, but only on certain elements of programme. And if by coordinating better at chief executive level, we can make sure that we all hit our own audience targets, then that's all to the good. I have experience of working in a similar way with some of the London producing theatres, and it was very successful for all of the organisations by opening up a shared understanding of who is going to what, in which venue and when, so that you then start to programme according to your audience. When I said that I intend on putting the audience at the heart of the organisation, I truly mean who is coming to see this? Who can we get to come and see this? Where are they coming from? Are all the questions that need to be answered before we agree to programme.
Thanks. I think I remember a previous presentation that you were commenting on how professional and adept our the set-making staff are out in Inverarmond, and that there was a possibility to sort of outsource work, and sort of commercialise some of that set-making. Do you see that as a possibility moving forward?
I think absolutely. We're going to trial it with the National Theatre Scotland over the summer. When we have a gap in our own workshop schedule, I think our head of production is rightly cautious around it, because obviously, it could become an industry in itself, and we need to manage the profit margin side of it, as well as our ability to use our facilities to do the things that we need from it. But I do think that we have skills and facilities that can be commercialised in that way, that will ultimately support what it is that we as an organisation do. There are quite well-known models up and down the UK of other organisations doing this, and I don't see why it should work any differently here.
Thanks. It's reassuring that you're looking outward to where best practice is over the whole of the country, and I'm sure some of the best practice will be coming in Perth as well, and people will take advantage of that as well. But I think it's it's reassuring to myself anyway to hear that that's the approach you're taking, Nick. Thanks. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Nick. My question is really about engaging with the tourism industry, and particularly our local hotels and restaurants, and I guess coach tours and parties who bring people to the city centre or the environments. I'm just wondering what plans you might have to generate audience engagement in that way.
So I think that hasn't been possible previously because our planning cycle hasn't been, or rather our public-facing cycle hasn't been long enough in advance. So 3 brochures a year covering 4 months that have traditionally come out quite close to the beginning of the start point of the brochure isn't long enough for a coach party market. So moving to 2 6-monthly cycles should allow us a much greater lead time to have those conversations with coach tours and different operators to say, well, if you're, this is what we're doing, this is the theatre potential, this is classical music, this is whatever. I think it would be, it's a new area. We would have to go and make those relationships and probably rely on introductions from tourism colleagues who already know who the players are. But I really do think that, all of our departments need to not just think about our building and need to go out and make those connections properly. I don't think it's something that we can factor in for the immediate coming financial year, because I think, like all new areas of work, it takes research and planning and time. But I don't see why we shouldn't be doing it as a part of a bedrock of our marketing strategies. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, we move on to paper 5. It's the only paper that we've got here today. It's about it's the inspection report on the registration of births, deaths, marriages and civil partnerships. And I'll get Lisa Simpson to introduce the paper. What I would like to point out is, before Councillor Parrott does, is that a table showing on a graph can be really misleading when the baseline starts at 96 and only goes up to 99. It looks like there's a massive change between 2011 and 2018, and you're only looking at 2%. So I managed to get that in because I've heard it from him many times in the last 5 years. Lisa, I'll let you introduce it.
This is basically a report on our statistics in terms of accuracy for registration services. You will see that this relates to the period of 2018, but that's because the National Records of Scotland have just released these statistics now, so we are working against a backlog. I think committee members will realise that it was only a few months back that we had the 2017 statistics. So although they are of some vintage, I think what it demonstrates is that accuracy levels are incredibly high. The movements in percentages can be down to a single entry in a small place, a small registration service, where we're not processing an awful lot of applicants. So in terms of assurance around systems, processes and accuracy, I think that this should give assurance to the committee. But I'm quite happy to take any questions. But the report itself, the content is self-explanatory.
Do we have any questions on this report? Councillor Jarvis.
It's just a question to satisfy my curiosity. It's the vertical graph, if you like. And again, I appreciate the figures are not huge, but there seemed to be quite a step change between 2014 and 2015, where the numbers rose and it hasn't gone back down again. Did something change at that point? The reporting method?
I honestly don't know, Councillor Jarvis, but I can try and find out for you. It wasn't within my service, and in fact 2014 I wasn't even here. But I'm happy. But I will ask our service manager about that, and I'll clarify that for you. I will see if anybody knows the answer.
Thank you, Councillor Jarvis. Any other questions on the report? Councillor McCall.
Again, since Councillor Jarvis opened up the prospect of curiosity, I'm curious about the mix between the two types of errors on clause 1.6, the wrong errors provided by the informant and clerical errors, if we have any indication of where the errors lie.
Sorry, Councillor McCall, can you?
I'm just curious of the errors that do occur, how many are typically down to informant errors and how many are typically down to clerical errors?
I don't have that information to hand, but I can try and find out.
What I think we can say is that the accuracy levels are extremely high, and I think the staff that work within these offices should be commended on how accurate they are in every aspect to try and maintain accuracy. The bit that interested me, I didn't realise that we actually have a home-based registrar in Kinlochranach, which is tremendous, because I take it from that somebody just works from their house and goes out. If you could maybe just, it's a point of interest to how we're serving a local community to save them on a long trip.
Yeah, the point of that is to make sure that there is registration provision, and the most effective way to do that, to save people having to travel into other offices where we have an office location, as we have a home-based registrar, and that has worked really successfully, is very much welcomed in the community, and works very effectively for us and keeps that presence of the registrar service very local indeed.
Good, thank you. If there's not any more questions on the report, or have we got any comments? Councillor Barnacle.
I'd just like to say I think it's a really good report, and it shows a high level of satisfaction really with the service. I just think it should be commended. Yeah.
Thanks for that. And that seems to be the agreement of all the councillors here. If you can pass that on for us, Lisa. Thank you very much. Can we note the report? Thank you very much for your attendance.